Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Angela Borsetti from EBSCO, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us today in EBSCO's WebEx series. We have a really engaging session planned for you all, but before I introduce you to our speaker, I have a few housekeeping items that I wanted to go over to ensure a smooth session. The first being that the session is now being recorded. The recording will be made available to you all post-session via a unique page, in addition to an email memo that you will be receiving in the coming days. Be sure to stay on the line until the end of this session, as this page contains some free takeaways. Second, I've muted all your lines to avoid any feedback or interruption during the WebEx. We thank you in advance for keeping your line muted throughout our event. However, we highly encourage your participation during the course of the presentation. Do not hesitate to enter any questions that you may have at any point. Please enter these questions in the chat box, and you may send them to my attention directly. Finally, I'd like to introduce you all to our speaker, whom we are thrilled to have joining us today. Karan Girotra is a professor of technology and operations management at INSEAD. His research has appeared in top academic journals and has been featured extensively in business press. He is a winner of the Best Professor in the MBA Program Award, runner-up for the Best Professor in the Executive MBA Program, and four-time winner of the Dean's Award for Excellence in Teaching. In addition to his academic work, Karan was a founder of TerraPass Inc., which the New York Times identified as one of the most noteworthy ideas of 2005. His presentation today, titled The Risk-Driven Business Model, 4 Questions That Will Define Your Company, is based off his co-authored book, and a summary of this book is now available via EBSCO's Business Book Summaries. Please join me in a warm welcome to Karan. I'm now passing the ball over to you. Take it away.
Thanks a lot, Angela, and thanks everyone for making it to this WebEx. Like Angela said, today's presentation will be based on our book, which is available in stores. The book is called The Risk-Driven Business Model: 4 Questions That Will Define Your Company. So the story today, what I'll tell you in the WebEx, will really be the story of how even this book came about. So like Angela mentioned, I've been a professor at INSEAD for the last 7-8 years. Before that, I was a professor in the U.S. at the University of Pennsylvania at the Wharton School of Business, and the focus of my work has always been innovation. Now, innovation is something which is one of the least controversial topics as it comes to business thinking, in the following sense. You poll a group of CEOs, almost all will agree that one of their top priorities is that they want their companies to be really, really innovative. In fact, we see that reflected in a lot of mission statements and so on and so forth. We looked at a lot of different Fortune 500 companies and what kind of terms they were using in their annual reports. Innovation was one of the most frequently used terms. And this is all for good reason. Innovation has indeed moved mankind forward, either be it innovation in medicine, in information technology. Certainly, it's been very critical to making certain countries or regions do far better than other regions because they were able to innovate. And we all love a lot of innovative products, including the ones that come from Apple and other products which we all did not exist a few years back, and we all enjoy using. So innovation is what everyone wants to do, and it's a good thing because innovation is what changes the world. However, if we think of a manager today, and I think that a manager needs to start adapting his skill set in the context of what this new innovation, importance of innovation reality brings. So about 10-15 years back, the top manager, if I may say, or one of the persons that people wanted to follow the most was someone like Jack Welch. His legacy really is a legacy of continuous improvement, of making things better. Let's come 10 years later or 15 years later to today's time. One of the CEOs who's most admired, probably not a living CEO, but one of the most admired CEO that a lot of people want to be like is Steve Jobs. Now, Steve Jobs' legacy is very different from Jack Welch's legacy. His legacy is really not about improvement, but really about innovation, about changing things. And very upfront, I want to clarify the difference between the two. An improvement is something which makes the world 3, 4, 5% better. An improvement is something which makes your bottom line 4, 5% better. And innovation is something that has a radical change in how your numbers look. Not 4, 5% better, but perhaps 50% better, 100% better. And that really is the focus of what we're looking at, innovations. The way, now Steve Jobs is indeed one of the most admired leaders in the space of innovation. But if you look at how Steve and many others view innovation, most folks think of innovation as a way of creating new products, perhaps like the iPad, or I have a couple of other products up there. You may like or not like the products, but they were very different from the existing products. And these new products open new markets for these companies. That's one way in which people think of innovation, developing new products. Another way in which we think of innovation is developing new technologies. There are a whole host of technologies like 3D printing today, medical technologies, all of which are innovative and are improving the world. So this is how most of the world views innovation, either develop new products or develop new technology. But if we really look a little bit deeper, this is probably not the only two ways to do innovation. In particular, my main thesis today would be that this view of innovation, which is embodied in today's senior management and in the popular press, that innovation comes from developing new products, opening new markets, or developing new technologies, is perhaps a little bit limited. What I'll try to do today is talk to you about one industry, transportation, how we get around from one place to another, and show, if you look at the almost 100 or 150-year history of this industry, we'll find that the most crucial breakthroughs, the most crucial progress was perhaps made by not really developing new products or by new technology. So let's start taking this journey through time. Let's go almost 110 years or so back. The man that you are hopefully seeing on your screens right now is a great American leader. Most of us can probably recognize him. This person is Henry Ford. Not surprisingly, Henry Ford is the person who was the founder of the Ford Motor Corporation, and in today's, we all know the company was founded in central United States, and the company continues to exist today, almost 115, 120 years after its initial founding. Also, just looking into his biography, if we had him as at his peak, his wealth computed in today's dollars would make him by far almost 3 times as rich as the richest person alive today. So indeed, he was a fairly prominent businessman about 120 years back. What was the core of his success? So Henry Ford changed the business of making cars in three different ways. First, actually a little bit of context before we go into what Henry Ford did. Before Henry Ford actually came on the scene, the internal combustion engine was invented, and in fact there were many manufacturers of cars based on fossil fuel-based technologies, be it gasoline or diesel. Most of the pioneering engineering work was done in Germany. Folks like Gottlieb, Daimler, who had really invented the technology behind the car, so to say. Now Henry Ford comes in and he tries to change 3 things about how this industry works. The first one of them is that he says these Germans were making the cars, and they were mostly making them for very rich customers and to order. So you could go in and say, I want a car in a certain color, with a certain seat type, with a certain kind of leather. Henry Ford comes in and he says, you know what, we're not going to do it this way. We're going to have cars and very famously he said, any customer can have a car painted in any color that he wants, as long as it is black. Essentially what he was saying was that he's going to limit the variety available to the customers drastically from what was available before. And why he did that relates to the second big difference he made in how cars were made, That had to do with the actual manufacturing process. Now, traditionally, when these German cars were being made, the reason they could make them to order was because they were almost made in an artisan fashion. Artisan is a word we use a lot today, particularly in the food context, but in the physical products context, it generally means very small batch production. And at that time, in the early 1900s, when it came to cars, it really meant making one car by one. A group of workers would stand around a car, and each one of them would make it. It might take almost a couple of weeks, 3-4 weeks, to actually make that car. Henry Ford comes in and he says, no, we're going to make cars in a different way. We're not going to do this artisan style of production. Instead, we will do assembly line production, where an employee will not be responsible for every task needed to make the car or for a large number of tasks, but he'll do one small thing, but he'll do it very fast. And essentially, we all know how assembly lines work, how they divide work between different employees and make it super efficient. So he comes in and introduces this next, another different way of making cars. The third big change Henry Ford brings to the auto industry really has to do with the structure of the industry. And there are two important elements to it. First, Henry Ford went in for a industrial model where the Ford Motor Corporation did not just assemble the car like the Ford Motor Corporation of today, but instead it also made the steel that went into the car. It also owned the iron ore mines from which this iron could be mined to make the steel. It owned the railroad which would transport the steel. It owned the power plant which really would provide the electricity to the factory floor. So this was vertical integration, massive vertical integration of the kind we don't see today and the world had not seen ever before. So he went very, very vertically integrated, including, as the slide says, ships, tires, everything. A second difference in the industrial organization that he brought in was really in how he dealt with the employees. So on the supplier side, he didn't really have any. All the suppliers, Ford was its own biggest supplier. But on the employee side also, Ford went very much in contrast to conventional wisdom in introducing a model of what is perhaps now called welfare capitalism. What it meant was that any employee working at Henry Ford's facilities, even the most junior, most employee, the worst paid employee would get at least a $5 a day a wage. In today's dollars, that corresponds to almost $200 a day of a wage. This is, as most of us can do the math, this is a significantly higher salary than the minimum wage today. So Henry Ford promised that any employee working at Ford would earn a decent living and in fact would be rich enough to buy one of Ford's own products. And this is quite radical if we think about it. At that time, things were not as mechanized, so a lot of the folks in the factory were doing fairly what might today be called primitive tasks which in today's world would not pay you a very high wage. Despite all of that, even the least skilled employee on a Ford factory floor or in the Ford Motor Corporation was paid about $150 to $200 a day in today's numbers. So Henry Ford comes in. There are the Germans who are making these niche products, and he comes in with these radical ideas on how to organize a car company, how to really run this company, be it on variety, be it on how production is done, and be it on how they deal with suppliers and employees. As a whole, all these little changes had a huge disruptive impact. In particular, while the luxury car makers were making cars at a price which could keep the whole industry size to be about 4,000, 5,000 cars a year, I'm talking for all companies, Henry Ford comes in and makes the market size of the order of 1 million cars in a year. And how does he do that? Because if you look at these processes, limiting variety, the assembly line, all of these are about getting a disruptive reduction in cost. These make the cost of producing a car far lower than the cost of making cars in the traditional way. As a whole, this creates a whole new market for cars, and the rest really is history. All of this, we've come up with many names for what Henry Ford's relatively simple ideas were, we call it mass production. And there have been more iterations of improving that in different ways. What I think is sometimes what I want to highlight from this example of Henry Ford is as much what he did as what he did not do. So what he did is, I think, fairly well understood. What is a little less well understood is what did he not do. And here are the things Henry Ford did not do. Henry Ford did not come in and design a product which was superior to any existing product. He was not like some would argue Apple is. Apple often comes into a category and designs, at least to a certain population of people, a product that is far superior in performance, be it user comfort and performance or whatever, far superior than the existing status quo. Henry Ford had nothing like that going for it. In fact, most people would argue at that time that Henry Ford's products were, in terms of product design, not superior to the existing products. So Henry Ford did not do any great product design. Henry Ford did not also develop any of the technology that really goes into a car. All the core technological components were developed by the folks like Gottlieb, Daimler, Carl Benz, all the German pioneers of the industry. They had done almost all the technology work. And here comes in a man who doesn't do any product development or doesn't make a significant impact in developing the products, doesn't really change the technology, does a few things around how cars are made. And he is the man who ends up owning the industry. He is the person who actually ends up really making the substantial impact and making cars a product that all of us can afford to have. If it were not for the innovations of Henry Ford, it's very likely cars would be almost a niche product like today airplanes are. In fact, cars were made in volumes and using systems including exactly as the ones are used for airplanes, and that to relatively small market airplanes. So, and then the ideas of Henry Ford are not new to us, to most of our audience. We all know mass production, and now in the remaining 100 years, in the next 100 years, people have applied those ideas to many different industries, including airlines, including medicine, and that has had a tremendous impact even beyond the auto industry. So that's story number one. That's how the auto industry started. Henry Ford made us all made cars in a way that we could all afford to buy them. Then cars become affordable, many more people buy, the auto industry grows, couple of bad things happen in the world. There's the World War I, there's World War II, some economic bumps. Japan in particular is a country which is almost destroyed completely after the Second World War, and then comes a company from Japan which is again going to be the next big revolution insofar as this transportation business goes. This company is the Toyota Motor Corporation. Again, this is a company which at that time, particularly, I'm talking the early 60s now, early 60s Japan was a little bit like folks sometimes think of early 60s, think of China today. Relatively lower cost manufacturing, but perhaps not, at least in the consumer's mind, the highest quality products. So Toyota is really like a Geely, which is a Chinese auto company, is perceived by the market today. Relatively unknown, and those who know it for cost, not really for quality. So Toyota is entering this landscape, and by now there's Ford, there's General Motors, there's many other big American corporations around the Ford model. To enter this market, Toyota knows that they're a foreign manufacturer. They need to build confidence of the customer. And cars, in the 60s, particularly in the US, cars are now not just any other product that people buy, but a product which people have a huge emotional connection to. So if Toyota needs to break this in, they need to make people have a certain confidence in the quality of their products. In fact, they set the goal for themselves that they need to be far more reliable than any other car is in the market. What do? To get this quality right, they come up with first a very different way of dealing with their suppliers and more generally managing the company. In both managing the company and dealing with suppliers, they take a far more long-term view than most of the US companies were at that time. They take the view that we are going to be with these suppliers for perhaps another 20, 25 years. So we're not going to squeeze them for prices. We'll work with each other to develop components that will last long. Now, this kind of confidence that they instill in suppliers, that we're not just waiting to find a cheaper supplier next year, gets the suppliers so engaged that they work very hard to help this Japanese company break in. And it helped that most of the suppliers came also from the Asian management culture at that time. On top of it, they introduced what is now called the Toyota Way, the Toyota Production System, which essentially is about continuously improving, doing just-in-time production. The details of this are by now business history, and a lot of us know it. Again, I think what I want to highlight from this story is that Toyota does not come in with a superior product. It does not necessarily come up with a superior technology. What it does come up with is a different way to manage its business, either be its relationship with suppliers, or its mission of trying to always improve, or how it manages inventory, which is really just in time. So all of these things come together to make Toyota's cars more reliable than most other cars in the market. And before we know it, now in the next 15 years or so, the Japanese manufacturers are, and including today, are top all quality ratings, and Toyota becomes the next big event to happen in the industry of transportation. The way I see it, Henry Ford made it possible for each of us to be able to afford a car, but it's only with Toyota that we could actually rely on that car we could afford. And if you think about it, cars today are incredibly reliable compared to almost anything else, compared to computers, compared to anything else. You buy a car, if you buy a reasonable modern car today, a new car, it is highly likely that in the first 10 years of its life, it will need almost no maintenance. It will just run. As long as you put gas in it, check the tires, pretty much needs very little maintenance beyond that. And that really has to do with how Toyota changed how cars were made. Let's keep moving in our journey through time. So Henry Ford establishes this industry. Toyota makes the product reliable. Next comes in, and this is a revolution we're probably living through today. I've highlighted one company on the slide that you can see, but there are others who are trying to do similar things. Today we are observing another revolution in the transportation sector, both in the US and abroad. What we are seeing in large parts of the developed world is that the younger population is moving more and more into cities, and the rates of car ownership are in fact significantly lower than they used to be for the generation before them. Particularly, you see that in Europe, young people no longer dream of buying their first car, do not think of cars in the same way as the generation preceding them, as folks then perhaps who were born in the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s did. So folks in the 90s are a little bit less in this framework as far as cars are concerned. And part of this really has to do with new modes of transportation coming around, which really leverage a lot of information technology and other things to create shared transportation systems. It can be either more efficient use of public transportation systems, be it taxis, or it can be more peer-to-peer sharing of cars, or it can be folks offering each other rides on cars, carpooling, and things of these kind of models enabled by technology are really changing, perhaps changing the transportation industry another time. Let's look at one of these companies, which many of you might have heard of, Uber. Now, Uber makes basically an app which helps you find a taxi ride to get from point A to point B. And they have very slick marketing. The product is very, the transaction is highly frictionless. Let's look at what Uber fundamentally changed in this industry and why it is in the news all the time. Why is it having such a disruptive impact? So Uber's model is based again on three things that they're doing differently. First up, the transaction is extremely frictionless. You go in, you say you want a certain ride, you find a driver, and you take the ride. You get off the car. You don't have to pay the driver. There is almost no need for interaction as one rides this vehicle. There are a couple of other features that make the model very interesting. Next, Uber as a company does not own any physical assets. So while it is having a huge impact on the transportation sector, this company at least in its productive assets, does not own a single car. This is not a taxi company. This is not a transportation company, though it's changing the transportation sector. In fact, all it is doing is intermediating between folks who want a ride and folks who have the means to provide a ride. So this is a very asset-light model if we think about it. Second, this platform has created a free market of both providers and people and a place where people who need rides can come in and actually interact with each other. Essentially, one of the features that makes this free market or this platform operate is also changing prices to respond to demand-supply mismatches. So if a lot of people want to take a ride, Uber often increases its prices, what is known as surge pricing, and that leads to two impacts. First, people who don't really need the ride, when they see the higher price, are probably going to defer their travel or use other means, so it reduces demand. And at the same time, because the prices of the rides are higher, perhaps more drivers would want to sign on onto their companion apps, and that increases supply. So really, it is about setting up a platform where transactions are extremely frictionless, has no physical assets, and then really playing with pricing and other things to make the platform work efficiently, in particular to match supply with demand. Taken together, this is fundamentally reducing the need that many of us have for a vehicle. And that is arguably the next big revolution when it comes to the transportation industry. So over the last 120 years, these are probably the three big changes that we've seen across in the landscape, starting with Henry Ford to the Toyota way, and then finally perhaps these technology-enabled apps that really help us use the existing stock of vehicles more efficiently. The question in front of us is, what really is common in these three stories? In particular, what did all these companies do, and what did all these companies not do? So first up, remember we said innovation is really about developing new products in most of our minds. It really is about developing new technology. And if we look at these three companies, almost none of them has created any path-breaking technology. We already said Henry Ford's technology was fairly off the shelf. Toyota was not a technology leader, and Uber, certainly the app is while it might call itself a technology company, but the core technologies behind the app are available to each one of us and are in fact fairly primitive. There's nothing, they've all existed long before Uber as a company existed. The iPhone came out almost 4 years before with all the technologies that Uber uses today. So these were not technology innovators. These are not companies that had big R&D divisions to create innovation. Neither are these companies with talented product designers like Steve Jobs and others, or Johnny Ive, who create super beautiful products. The common thread between all three companies is that they change something about how the product is made. They change something about how they do things. And that is what we call changing the business model. This is not changing the product, this is not changing the technology, but this is really changing the business model around existing products made out of existing technology, sold mostly to existing markets. But we're changing how we provision this product to the customer, either by changing our relationships with the suppliers, either by changing how we make it, or by changing how we sell that service or product. As a whole, and typically it's not just one change, it is multiple small changes which constitute into a holistic, different business model, which is really what has been the focus of the book at the center of today's conversation, the risk-driven business model, and really what really drove most of the disruption in the auto industry. I want to highlight one thing before we move on into how to make this kind of disruption happen. All of these companies are highly disruptive. There are probably no other bigger companies or gainers in the transportation sector in the last 100 years. Perhaps Tesla can be added to the list, which has some technology but a lot of business model innovation in there also. As a whole, these are very disruptive companies on the basis of no new technology, no new product categories, no superior design. This, to me, the reason why we wrote this book was every time we meet senior management who wanted to go get innovative, make their companies more innovative, and immediately after saying that, they would jump into the trap of saying, to make this innovation happen, we need a bigger R&D budget to develop new technology. We need to design better products. And that is all well and good. But if you look at the history of companies that have been very disruptive, not just in the transportation industry, but in many other industries, we find that often the most disruptive companies have done it on the basis not of technology or product development, but on the basis of changing the business model around existing products. And that is, in our view, the blind spot of innovation. The one thing about innovation that most folks overlook, systematically thinking about this kind of innovation, as opposed to just thinking about product development or superior R&D. While there are huge similarities between these three companies, there's actually one important difference, which tells us a little bit about how business model innovation has changed in today's world compared to the past. So all of these are highly disruptive. All of these are doing it on the basis of a new business model. But what they really changed from a consumer's point of view is a little bit different in the three cases. In the case of Henry Ford, this really was change the business model, indeed, but to get the cost to be very low to lead to mass market adoption. In the case of Toyota, this really was changing how you deal with suppliers, how you manage your employees, so on and so forth, all to get superior quality, more reliable products. So there was cost, there was quality. If we think of Uber or companies today who are innovating in the transportation sector, the impact they've had is more subtle. It is not that they're working off a lower cost service. It is not that providing a service through Uber, the drivers can be paid less or there are much more efficiencies. If anything, drivers are indeed paid at times more on most of these services. It's really, one may argue that the consumer experience is better, but what is disruptive about Uber is not just that they improve the quality of the ride. What really is disruptive is this model of not owning a single car and really just a model of intermediating between demand and existing supply. If you think about this model a little more deeply, what it fundamentally changes is not the cost profile of the industry, not the quality profile or even the revenue profile of the industry. What it fundamentally changes is the risk profile of the industry. This happens in the following way. When Uber does not own any assets, they are no longer exposed to the risk of having a lot of cars sitting around that nobody wants to ride on. In particular, Uber can better manage all the demand surges, etc., largely because it has no fixed investments in things. To be sure, there are others who have fixed investments. But as far as Uber, the company, is concerned, if you compare it to an incumbent player in the taxi industry, you will find that it has a far superior risk profile than most other taxi or ride providing companies have. And that is at the core of its innovation. So what we see once we look at 100 years in this industry is that business model innovation has always been great, but the role of business model innovation has changed from being cost reducing, quality improving, to perhaps today being risk changing. In fact, as we started digging in our research, we looked at a lot of business model innovation, and as we dug deeper and deeper, we noticed that the greatest advances were happening, that a lot of the cost advantage gains, a lot of the quality improvement gains had already been done in most companies. In modern companies, there is fairly little possibility of having disruptive, and remember, disruptive innovation applies to 100% kind of changes. It's highly unlikely to find those opportunities today when it comes to cost reduction or quality. On the other hand, if we look at risks, there we think there is more impact to be able to do business model innovation, which is where this book comes in, that to innovate the risk-driven business model provides a framework to help companies change industries, disrupt the game by reinventing their business model or inventing a completely new different business model for an existing industry. We believe in today's world, the biggest opportunities lie in innovating business models so that they reduce the risks associated with the business model. The cost while it's great to reduce costs and increase revenues, or improve quality, but those kind of gains have mostly been already realized in companies, but the risk gains are still to be realized, which is why the future, we believe, lies in the risk-driven business model. In the book, The Risk-Driven Business Model, and the accompanying book summary available at EBSCO, we describe at length a systematic process to make these kind of changes happen in your organization. I'll give you a quick 3-minute, 4-minute summary of how you can make business model innovation happen in your organization. Of course, to fully understand it, I strongly, if this interests you, I strongly encourage you to either read the book or the book summary, which will describe this at length how it happens. So, at the core, this really the view of this risk-driven business model is that that we can't think of companies only in terms of what revenues they earn, what cost structure they have, how well they utilize their assets. We also need to think of them in terms of how exposed they are to risks of different kinds. In particular, we find there are 2 kinds of risks which companies experience, and understanding the impact of those risks on a business model's performance is crucial to understanding the places where the most opportunities for business model innovation will lie. These 2 inefficiencies have to do with information and alignment of incentives. Information inefficiency really is about making decisions in your business model without knowing what really is, if they're good or bad decisions, making decisions in the face of uncertainty. And alignment inefficiency is when folks in your business really have to make decisions, but the incentives might not be the same as the incentives of the larger business. I'll give 2 examples of companies that have worked around these inefficiencies, and then I'll show a quick framework on how you can do it in your organizations. So let's start with the information inefficiency. I'll speak about a company called Dell, which most of us are familiar with. And again, it was a pioneer. It's probably not doing so well today as it was in the early 90s, late 80s. But at that time, it was a hugely disruptive force in the computer industry. At the core of its innovation was also a new business model. Rather than making computers based on forecasts of what people would want, they made computers after people called them in or placed orders online. Again, like Uber, this is a low-risk model. You don't build huge inventories of assembled computers, which someone may or may not buy, but you actually go out, buy components from your suppliers, and assemble them after you've received the orders, so you're entirely certain that you're going to sell them. If we compare how Dell works with how a traditional computer manufacturer works, one can see that Dell makes the decision of making a computer under far less uncertainty. In particular, it has far better information on what kind of computer it needs to make than a traditional computer company. In fact, it has perfect information on what they need to make. And that is an example of a new business model based on reducing information inefficiencies. A second category of improvements are possible by changing how folks are compensated in a business model or in an industry. Here, another example I want to give, there are tons of new examples in the book which cover industries that many of us do not usually talk about. But for today's webinar, given our limited time, I want to use examples that most of us are familiar with. And the next example I want to use is a product we all struggle with or have struggled with. This is a photocopy machine. Photocopy machines traditionally were sold in the following way. You'd buy a machine from, let's say, Fuji Xerox, and then you'd also buy from the same company often a maintenance contract. A contract typically which would be, you'd pay them or in terms of whenever the machine would break down, you'd call them to send a service technician who you'd pay for time. and or materials that go into fixing the machine. In this business model, Fuji Xerox, the manufacturer of the photocopy machine, gets paid when you buy the machine, and more importantly, it gets paid when the machine is broken rather than when the machine is running. So if we think about the incentives of Fuji Xerox to design a machine that never fails, they're in fact not very high. As a photocopy maker, I'm actually better off if the machine doesn't work that well. As long as I've made the sale, as long as all machines don't work super well, I actually make more money as a maker of photocopy machines. Of course, the consumer is completely has different incentives. His business works better if the machines are running. So this industry was revolutionized by how photocopiers were sold about 10 to 15 years back, and under a larger theme of servicization. What started happening was, rather than selling photocopy machines and then repair services, some of these companies would come up with the following offer. They put a photocopy machine in your office for free, and you'd pay them for every page or paper that you would print in the photocopy machine. Now, what are the incentives of the manufacturer? This time, he or she, the manufacturer, the company, in the same way as the incentives for the consumer are. He or she gets value when a page is printed. This new business model of charging per page printed is in fact a model with lower misalignment, where the incentives of the different parties are more aligned. In particular, this business model comes from removing an alignment inefficiency in the industry. And those are the two big ways of fixing things in an industry. Reduce information gaps, like perhaps Dell did, and second, reduce misalignment of incentives, as we see in the photocopy industry. We provide a four-step way to do it. Really comes around changing how decisions are, changing the context and substance of decisions in an organization, really by questioning what decisions are made, when they're made, who makes them, and why they make them the way they make them. Once one goes through the systematic framework, one can identify a whole host of potential business model innovations for one's organization. I think I'll stop here and open the floor to discussion and questions and just really thoughts on how this relates to your organization, and rather than give more examples about what I talked about. To be sure, all of this is explained in far more detail with actionable examples, both in the book summary and in the book. The book is called The Risk-Driven Business Model: 4 Questions That Will Define Your Company. Angela, do you have any questions for us?
I've just entered in the chat box. To everyone, feel free to enter their questions at this time. We have one. Where does the risk formula come in?
So if you think about it, business models in academics have called business models, to analyze business models, they came up with something called the profit formula. The profit formula, they call, is really has to do with what are the costs of producing a product, what are the revenues you get from it, and some measure of how you utilize the assets you have, essentially fixed costs. This formulation of thinking about a business model, revenues, costs, does not fundamentally take into account the risks. A more superior way of thinking about this of a business is that it's not only about what the revenues are, only about what the costs are, and only about what your fixed costs are. It's a lot to do also with how much in sync the revenues and costs move. If, for instance, you have a lot of demand, your revenues go up and your costs go up in the same way, that means your costs and revenues are in sync. Another way of looking at it is if your demand goes away, if your costs do not go away, that means they're not necessarily in sync. So how these costs and revenues move with each other really defines how much risk your business model is exposed to. And that is where how risk comes into the profit formula. And another way of thinking about it is if we compute just the cost and the revenues of a company, there are a lot of assumptions into them, that how many units we'll sell, how will our suppliers, how reliable will be our suppliers in providing us products. Once we start taking out those assumptions and considering different scenarios of how much demand there might be and how much reliability, say for instance, we get from our suppliers, we can start introducing elements of the risk in this more formulaic formulation for analyzing a business model.
We welcome any further questions in the chat box at this time. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Karan, for your insights and your presentation. There was certainly a lot to be learned. And at this time, we're going to pass the ball over to Greg DiDonato, who is the Vice President of Field Sales here at EBSCO, to learn some more information about tools that can assist you in your learning needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And thank you, Karan. I appreciate the opportunity to hear your discussion today. It certainly was insightful, and we really appreciate the opportunity to have your title, The Risk-Driven Business Model, within our business book summary product. One of the things that resonated with me as we were taking a look at as I was reading through the business book summary, really was how closely aligned the risk-driven business model was to EBSCO's solutions. I want to go ahead and share my desktop with everyone so we can take a look at this. So EBSCO's solutions through our Leadership and Management Learning Center really are aligned to making sure we're providing the right information to help make the best business decisions possible, whether those are for leadership development, industry-specific information, research and development. Really, our business model is to make sure we're providing experts in the field like Karan, like those published by key publishers such as Harvard and Wiley, Taylor, and Francis. And we want to make sure we're putting that in the hands of you as the end user, leaders, managers, individual contributors, business analysts, R&D professionals, to make sure that those key pieces of information you can learn from the experts in the field. One of the key resources that we have to help support that is our Leadership and Management Learning Center, which is developed with several different content areas. One is the Business Book Summaries product that we own. It's a published product by EBSCO. We have over 2,000 titles currently within our Business Book Summary product area now, and we publish between 5 and 7 new titles each week. We're excited about the new Harvard Business Review Press agreement that we signed recently and added to our solution. Within the Leadership and Management Learning Center, we also provide video content. We have over 700 key videos with the latest publisher being Center for Creative Leadership. We also have journal and magazine content. Again, we have hundreds of thousands of journals at our disposal many within all the industries for your company specifically, but also across all leadership and management topics. We also have hundreds of thousands of ebooks available at our disposal to, again, help you with your decision-making and competency development within your organization. We support competency reports. Those are to help develop the competencies that you as an organization are highlighting and making sure that each level of employee, from individual contributor to middle manager to C-suite executive, has a clear understanding of the competencies, again, that are most important to your organization. And then to help support learning, we also have developed leadership and management comprehension tests. So each of these key pieces of content are going to be developed around your organization's key competencies, around your organization's learning initiatives, and are going to be implemented within a blended learning approach, whether it's formal learning, informal learning, or on-demand learning. We want to make sure that we're implementing our solutions where it's going to be most effective for your organization and for your learners. If you'd like a trial of the Leadership and Management Learning Center, you go to EBSCOhost.com and click on the Learning Resources tab. Underneath the corporations, click on Organizational Learning. You can click on the free trial, and a representative will get in touch with you, and we'll be able to provide you with access to the Leadership and Management Learning Center. Or if you're just interested in business book summaries and reading a specific title, we'll be happy to provide you with a specific content area or an overall view of the Leadership and Management Learning Center. We appreciate everybody's participation today, and we look forward to supporting your organizational learning needs in the future.